In this lesson, we'll use some polygon modeling techniques to build a few pieces for the front of the bike. So we want to build some pieces for the pivot up here for kind of the front fork. And so let's use a little bit different technique here, and something that we just kind of touched on in the last lesson with this piece. So the first piece we want to have is something that covers this opening right here. And so we'll go ahead and create polygon primitive, and let's create a cylinder. Okay, and we'll go over this a little bit slower than we did this last piece, but I just want to kind of move it into position. Now we need to decide, are we going to leave this as polygons, or are we going to smooth it to create a smooth surface? I know with our either smooth node or with hitting our 3 key. So if we decide that we're going to smooth it, then we don't need all of these polygons, because the smoothing is going to come from that smooth mesh preview. So in that case, we can dial down our resolution. So we're actually going to get something smoother, but we actually want to dial down the resolution. If we want to leave this as is, as polygons, we want it to be smooth, then we would up the resolution, then we wouldn't have to do anything to it. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and smooth this, so I'm going to dial down the resolution. I like to do it this way just because now we have only 8 points around the circle here to deal with. We have very few points, so if we need to modify this, it's very easy to do versus something that is a lot more high res. It's a little bit more difficult to work with, and plus you have the extra polygons that you have to deal with in rendering. Okay, so we can go ahead and now we can decrease the height. All right, and so we want to get something like this. Now let's take a look at this. If we smooth this as is, we get this sort of soft pancake shape. So we want to have something that has some detail along the edges up here and down here. And so there are a number of ways that we can get that beveled look. Okay, since we're using a smoothing workflow, okay, we're going to smooth it. If then we'll do it a specific way. If we were going to leave this polygons, we would just use bevel, which we will take a look at later, I believe. But since we're smoothing it, what we want to do is we want to either crease the edges, or we want to add resolution here. Now, one way that we can do this creasing, we looked at creasing for sub-D surfaces, but we also have creasing for our smooth mesh preview. Okay, so we select those edges here, and we can just click shift, actually just double click there to get that, and then we can go into polygons, and we actually want to go down to the crease tool. So click on the crease tool, and then I'll middle mouse drag on these, and that will actually crease that. So we haven't added any resolution here, but now we have a completely sharp edge with our smooth mesh preview. Okay, so that's one way to go about doing it. The way that I usually like to do it is actually to add resolution along these edges. So right now the smoothing is happening between this point, this point, and this point, which creates a very smooth surface. So we want to add more resolution along these edges. The disadvantage of this, of course, is that we're adding extra resolution. We're adding extra lines in there to actually create that. The advantage of that is that all of the information that we need on the smoothing of this is contained within the polygon. So if I'm passing this off to somebody else, and they're going to work with it, do whatever they need to, and then it's going to be, we're going to use the same subdivision algorithm or smoothing algorithm at the end to smooth it out. We know exactly what it's going to look like, because all of that geometry is built in. Whereas if I have maybe subdivision surface with creasing, or something like that, where we're working with a low res mesh, and then we have information that's contained in, let's say, the subdivision surface, the hierarchy, and something like that, that is a little bit less self-contained. So this is just a little bit easier to handle. We can export like an OBJ. I've got just a strict polygon, straight polygons there, and it's all contained within there. So it's up to you how you want to do that, but that's just kind of what I like to do. So there are a few ways to add those extra edge loops. We can select the tops and bottom faces here and go to extrude. Okay, and then to scale this, I'll just click on one of these little boxes, and then on the center box I'll just scale that. That's going to scale all those in locally. Okay, we'll scale them in until we get that edge right up against there. Okay, so that's one edge loop. Now we want to add a couple of more. So we can go into our Insert Edge Loop tool and very quickly just drag an edge right up there and right down there. Okay, now when we smooth it, we get something that is much better, and we get a little bit of a highlight there, a little bit of a bevel on the edges, which is what we want. Alright, now looking at the top of this cylinder, right now it's made up of a lot of triangles. Now when we're working with subdivision surfaces and smoothing, a lot of times I'll try to use quad geometry as much as possible. Now it's actually very easy to turn this cylinder, the top and bottom of the cylinder, into quads. We just select every other line here and go ahead and just delete those. Okay, we can do the same thing down here. Okay, and we smooth that out. We get a nice clean piece here. So let's go ahead and move that into position. Alright. Now, I want to shape it a little bit. You can see that it is not really that narrow here at the front. I want to actually make this a bit more narrow and then go into the side. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and take this top and let's just rotate it. Okay. So we're just hitting E on our keyboard, rotate it slightly in the X. Okay. Move it up a bit and then let's move the whole thing up. Alright. So we have this. Now what we want to do is match this up with this pivot. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab a lattice we looked at earlier. Let's see if we can get these points here and just kind of narrow that down a little bit. Alright. We can go ahead and make that a bit longer so it starts to encompass that whole thing. Alright, let's go ahead and delete our history here to get rid of our lattice. Alright, and now we need a sort of round pivot that is going to actually turn around. To do that, you can do something very simple. Just get a, let's actually just get a NURBS cylinder, because it's going to be, all we need is that cylinder shape. We don't need the caps or anything like that. And so we can go ahead, bring this up here. If you want to scale it, you can scale it. Otherwise, you can change the radius. So get something, maybe something like that. And now the last piece is going to be the piece that actually connects to this lower piece and also to the handlebars. So for this, we can go ahead and create another polygon primitive, and let's create another cylinder. Okay, we'll kind of move it over into position. Again, let's use a smoothing method, so go ahead and dial the resolution down. Okay, if you want to create those subdivisions already, you already know you need them. We can go ahead in our create node here and add those. So added 3 subdivisions along the height and 2 along the cap will give us the subdivisions we need, so we don't actually have to add them in. And then we can just double click on our edge here, move it up, do the same thing here, move it down, double click on this edge and scale it out, and there we've essentially done the exact same thing. We just had that geometry added upon creation of our cylinder. Alright, now let's say in this case we figure out at this point that, you know, we actually, I want to have a bit more detail in here. So I want to be able to extrude some details on this, and if I extrude them from what the geometry that we have here, you can see I only have 2 faces if I want to do something like this. So I want to have the ability to extrude something that's a little bit more detailed. So we can use a smooth. So we're going to mesh, smooth, and that gives us something that is a little bit more high res. Okay. Now if you know at the beginning when you create your cylinder that you want to have something high res, you can of course create something that's more high resolution at that point. Let's go ahead and put it into position here. Alright, and I think we want to probably scale that down a bit. All right. We also want to kind of taper it. So we can use a deformer for that. We'll go to create deformers. Let's go down to, this is in the animation toolset, by the way. Go to create deformers, nonlinear, and let's do a flare. We'll add a flare deformer. Come down into the flare input. And let's try this start flare Z, and we'll decrease that. Alright, so we get something like that. Let's delete our history, and I'm just going to scale this down a little bit, and we can use our image as reference. Flatten it out a bit. Okay, move this pivot over so it's kind of in the center. Alright, actually, if we undo out of there, you can see that when we did the Z, okay, we also needed to come in and do in the other direction. So we'll take the X to 0.6 as well. Okay, just so it's nice and round. We'll delete our history, move this back into the center. Now, because we have this extra resolution, we can actually use it to extrude up a piece here and also at the front. Now, if we want to work on a piece in our model that is obstructed by other pieces, it's very easy to go into Show, Isolate, Select, and View Selected. That will just allow us to look at the piece that we're working with. Okay, if we want to turn that off, we can do that. So none of that geometry is being deleted. We're just not able to see it. Okay, so let's go ahead and take these faces, and I'm going to select all the way kind of out to the end here. Alright, and let's extrude those up. Now I want them to have a sharp kind of line here, and so for that I want to extrude them up just a little bit so we have that extra line. Now right now if I pull them out, they're going to be pulled out along the normal, and so I want to use the sort of world axis, so I'll click on this little blue button here. That'll change it so I can just pull those straight up. Now to repeat that tool, like if I just extruded, as I did, and I want to extrude again, I can just hit G on the keyboard. Again, I'll switch that pivot and pull it up. Now this is going to be soft here. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So it's going to look like something like that. Now you can see that we have a little bit of an issue here, and that's just because of the curvature of this. If we were able to add more lines in here, we could make that a bit smoother. Okay, let's do the same thing over here on this side, and let's make this a little bit taller. So we'll come in here. This time let's just extrude it straight up. Go to extrude, go to our world axis here, extrude that straight up. Let's go back to see how this fits together. Okay, so this one we actually need to scale up because we want this front part to be out here in front of this. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this up a bit. And we'll move it forward a little. Okay, we still want to be able to connect that up. Now if we want to tighten up the top of that, we can. I'm going to go ahead and leave that for now. Alright, so that's some of the really simple techniques for working with polygons as far as adding extra edges, using a smoothing workflow, and so forth. So the next thing that we want to do is to go ahead and just finish up this front fork. So tweak this area, come down here, and there's a couple of pieces that we want to build down here at the bottom. So we'll use some different techniques for that, and we'll do that next.